It's past midnight on a residential street in London, and there's a fox sitting under a street lamp, completely still, watching a man walk past with his shopping. It doesn't run, it doesn't even flinch. It waits until he's gone, then trots straight into his front garden, pulls a takeaway bag out of a torn bin liner, and eats dinner 8 feet from his front door like it pays rent there. Nobody taught this fox to do that, nobody bred it, trained it, or domesticated it on purpose. And yet if you compared its skull to a fox living in the countryside 60 miles away, you'd find measurable differences. A shorter snout, a rounder face, a smaller brain case. Something has been happening to this animal, quietly, for decades, and almost nobody noticed until scientists started measuring skulls. This isn't a fox behaving cleverly. This is a fox in the middle of becoming something else, and the strange part is, we've watched this exact transformation happen once before. Somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago, wolves started hanging around human camps. Not tamed wolves, not pets. Just wild animals drawn in by the easiest meal on the continent. Our garbage. And here's the detail that matters. Not every wolf could tolerate getting that close to people. Most fled, but a handful didn't. The ones with slightly calmer nervous systems. The ones who could sit near a fire full of humans without their whole body screaming at them to run. Those wolves ate more. And those wolves survived better. And those wolves had puppies who inherited that same, slightly calmer wiring. Generation after generation, without a single human ever deciding to breed a dog on purpose, the population sitting at the edge of our campfires got tamer and tamer and tamer, until one day, the animal sitting there wasn't really a wolf anymore. Here's what should stop you. Tameness wasn't the only thing that changed. Somehow, selecting for one single trait, calmness around humans dragged along a whole suite of totally unrelated features. Floppy ears, curled tails, patchy, piebald coats, shorter snouts, rounder, more puppyish faces that stay puppyish into adulthood. None of that has anything to do with surviving near a campfire, so why did it show up anyway? For decades, that question had no real answer. It looked like a coincidence, or a myth, the kind of thing you'd read in a pop science book and shrug off. Then, in 1959, a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev decided to actually test it, on purpose, using an animal that had never been domesticated at all. He started with silver foxes on a fur farm in Siberia. Every generation, he picked out only the calmest individuals, the ones that didn't flee or snap when a human approached, and bred only them, nothing else. Not size, not coat quality, not intelligence. Just tameness, generation after generation. Within 8 to 10 generations, barely a decade, those foxes stopped looking like wild foxes at all. Their ears went floppy, their tails curled up over their backs, white patches started appearing on their coats, their faces got rounder and softer. Some of them started barking, a sound wild foxes essentially never make. Belyaev had set out to breed calm foxes, and instead he'd accidentally built dogs, from scratch, in under a lifetime, using nothing but which individuals got to have babies. Comox. Sit with that for a second. He never touched a single gene directly. He just decided, generation after generation, who got to reproduce. And an entire package of traits that all humans associate with domesticated animal, floppy ears, curly tails, patchy coats, came along for free, as a side effect of selecting for something else entirely. No reason turns out to live in a strange corner of embryonic development. Early in an embryo, there's a group of cells called neural crest cells that migrate around the body and eventually build a surprising range of things. Parts of the skull and face, pigment cells in the skin, and the adrenal glands that control the fight-or-flight stress response. Breed for calmer, less reactive animals, and you're indirectly selecting for embryos where those neural crest cells behave slightly differently. And because those same cells also build the face, the ears, and the coat pattern, tameness and floppy ears and patchy fur end up biologically bundled together, whether you meant to select for all of it or not. One small dial, turned for one reason, quietly changes 5 things at once. Which brings us back to that fox in the London garden. Nobody at any point decided to domesticate urban foxes. There was no breeding program, no Belyaev running experiments in a lab. Instead, cities did the same thing to foxes that early human camps did to wolves, just slower and completely by accident. Reliable food in the bins, fewer predators, no hunting pressure. And crucially, the same selective sieve. Fox is too nervous to tolerate traffic noise, street lights, and close human contact, simply left, or struggled, or stayed on the outskirts. The bold, calm ones stayed in the core of the city, ate well, and had cubs. Researchers studying London's red foxes started measuring skulls from urban populations against skulls from rural ones, and found exactly the pattern you'd predict if you already knew the Belyaev story. Urban fox skulls trending shorter and wider in the snout, smaller relative brain size, a shift toward the same general shape change seen in domesticated animals compared to their wild ancestors. Foxes have only been living densely inside British cities in real numbers since roughly the 1930s and 40s, and that shift is already measurable. Not over 10,000 years, but over decades, some of it possibly within living memory of a single long-lived fox family line. Think about how strange that actually is. The wolf-to-dog transformation is one of the most famous events in the history of life on Earth, and we've spent thousands of years assuming it required something special: ancient campfires, prehistoric hunter-gatherers, ice age landscapes. Instead, it turns out the recipe is almost embarrassingly simple. Take a wild animal, remove the predators, hand it a steady food source, and reward the calmest individuals with survival. Do that for long enough, and evolution does the rest, whether or not anyone is paying attention. And once you know the recipe, you start seeing it everywhere. Urban coyotes in North America, raccoons that no longer bother fleeing at the first sight of a human, pigeons that will eat out of your hand without a second thought. Every major city on the planet may be quietly running its own uncontrolled version of Belyaev's fox farm, right now, in alleyways and parking lots and back gardens, with nobody keeping records, nobody selecting on purpose, and no clear idea of what these animals will look like in another 100 years if the trend just keeps going. We like to think of domestication as something that happened to us a handful of times a long time ago, safely finished and filed away in history. But that was never true. Domestication isn't an ancient event. It's a process, and the ingredients that trigger it, human food, reduced danger, tolerance for boldness, are more widespread on Earth right now than at any point in history. We didn't stop running that experiment, we just stopped noticing we were running it. So the next time a fox sits calmly under a street lamp and watches you walk by without a flicker of fear, you're not looking at a clever animal that's learned to cope with the city. You're looking at evolution, mid-sentence, quietly rewriting a wild species into something closer to a dog, using the exact same method that built the first one, just with a wheelie bin instead of a campfire. Nobody planned it, nobody's running it on purpose. And somewhere in that same city tonight, a fox cub is being born who will grow up a little bolder, a little calmer, and a little more at home next to us than its parents were, carrying forward a transformation that started before any of us were watching and hasn't stopped since.